All right, it looks like we're at 7 o'clock, so we'll call the meeting to order. We'll start with Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call to the public here before the meeting begins. Anybody, anything at this time?
I just have a question. Can you answer call to public, or you guys can't answer the question?
Go ahead, we can.
Sometimes.
Well, depending on the question,
All right.
right?
It's a good
It's
question.
easy one for you guys, not for me. I can't
Okay.
figure out. So if the township puts a park together, is the township responsible for the maintenance and insurance of it? You guys know that?
We defer to
Generally,
Ross or Zach.
It depends.
Oh,
So the traditional model is that the park has it, or the community has it, and they'll maintain it. But there are a lot of different models now, so like the riverfront in Detroit, the city owns it, but they don't manage it at all. There's an entire separate entity.
who pays them?
They raise money from different groups.
Well, that's a pretty big one, but I mean like locally here.
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with here. The traditional model is that you have it, you own it, but I do know some other things. Metro parks will sometimes operate property that they don't own, so the community will have it. And they'll come in and do the maintenance, the mowing, that type of stuff. So there are all sorts of models.
Well, it depends who owns the land, for one thing.
Yep.
If it's donated, or if the township owns it, or if it's state land, or whatever, it makes a lot of difference.
there's various larger private associations and groups, like nature associations and things like that, that'll also manage nature preserves, that sort of thing, those type of quasi-public parks and things. But a lot of the time it's the municipality. It just depends on how it's set up. And if there's safeguards in place to ensure that if it is a private group, that it's maintained without defaulting to the township, the municipality at some
And
point.
they pay for the insurance for it,
Yeah, my experience is that the liability, if you're a local unit of government for parkland, is relatively low, as long as there aren't hazards and ridiculous stuff there. It's really minor compared to other liabilities that exist.
Thanks.
You talk about us having a park, but who would pay for it?
Yeah,
The
just
township?
curious.
I would check with Deerfield Township, because they have a park. They bought some property at the end of Cahaka Road and Green Road. And it's all that, they got a horse trail, there's a lake down there. So check with Deerfield, they'll probably tell you if they insure and maintain, who pays to maintain, that'll give you some kind of idea.
They also have those walking trails there,
Yeah.
off of Abbey Road.
You know?
We actually have more than 20 parks in Livingston County. And there's so many parks close to here, from Fenton and Holly, and I thought if we had to maintain it and the liability, and it goes into our taxes, I mean, we got so many other parks around, why would we need one here? But that's just
We're
my
good.
opinion.
It's like your tax bill, we're paying for, you're on Metro right now. Mine was over $25. And I still gotta pay to get in.
The millage that was put into effect in like 1940 or something that is in perpetuity, yeah, that's
So,
pretty strange.
you know, I paid $12 for my license plate to get in the state park,
Yeah,
and I don't have to pay to get in. But I'm paying $25 on my taxes.
I have a lot of personal questions about that.
Yeah, I brought it up.
That was voted in 1940.
And I brought that up at the board
Perpetuity,
meeting.
yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, so if we do get a park, they won't be able to answer this, but if we do get a park, do we get some of that money? That's something we gotta ask the board. that $25 is going to your metro. Can we pull some of that back for our own park? But that's something.
Good luck on that.
That's
Yeah, I don't
about
think
something.
so. I would not hold your breath on that.
Thanks for the,
Yeah, good luck, you're right.
thanks for the question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Anything else? So, anybody have any issues with the agenda? If not,
Move to approve the agenda.
support from anybody? Support. Thanks. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So no minutes for approval. And so old business, item number 1 is the master plan. And Zach, I don't know if you have any updates or new items to go over, or?
Yes. There's some wrinkles with this, and it has kind of some decisions that kind of help focus the scope. So we're still kind of in the kickoff element where we really necessarily haven't had the discussion about the big picture things, what we really want to look at. I've heard and I have some ideas based on conversations here, but we really haven't put pen to paper to document that fully. So I guess I'll take us through kind of the decisions to get you guys thinking about what affects the scope of what we do. So on to page 2. It's my understanding that the Planning Commission is going to serve as a steering committee. The question is, as we pull that up there, will there be a smaller body that provides guidance in between meetings? Like, so for example, if there are pictures in your current master plan, if we have to start picking between pictures to go in different places, that's something that a smaller group can do outside of the larger process that doesn't really have an effect? Or do we want all decisions to go through the Planning Commission? And would you like me to run through all the wrinkles first, or do we want to tackle one
Just
by
for
one?
reference, on that point, the last time around, the planning commission basically did everything. They put together the photos, they put together the entire document, basically from start to finish. Not to say that that's the way to go this time, but just for historical background, that's the way that it was done last time,
Yeah.
a decade ago.
Yeah, which is good to know, and I wonder, I don't know if that would be a very successful path this time around. I don't know unless someone has time to volunteer to do that. It seems like a ton of work, but just a thought initially. But
You do have a subcommittee
yeah.
that could,
You have the planning commission subcommittee, but
Yeah.
the township could potentially, if you decide that that's something that you could do, could put together a different committee for specifically photos or minor things.
As far as the decisions, it seems like master plan is like, say, a year-long process. We meet twice a month. So it seems like if we needed to make a decision on what photo to use, we could just do it next Wednesday or whatever.
Good.
But I also feel, on the other hand, I feel like we keep talking about the master plan, but we haven't really got too much progress. So is it hard to make progress within the planning commission meetings? In addition to other things that come along, other applications that other than applications, sidelines, or whatever other business we have.
As part of the process, we definitely want to set up additional
Yeah.
meetings or forums for general input from the public during this whole process, outside of the regular meeting times. It's really up to you with what extent you want to set those up.
And so, so the reason why we haven't really done a bunch of work yet is I could go generate billables tomorrow on master plan right now. There's a bunch of stuff I can start doing, but I'm not sure if you remember my metaphor of we're on a sailboat. I need to know where you guys want to sail to before I just start going. I can make really great time, but I'm going to be on the wrong side of the bay, and then it doesn't do us any good that we got there. So we're still in that kind of determining the lay of the land, where you want to go. So another big decision point is under the task 1.4, the community survey. So, as I mentioned last time, the most common form is an online survey these days. You can send out information to folks, go here to the survey. It is possible also to do hard copies that are available at the township hall for folks who don't want to do that. The most common is open surveys where folks go in and they can say, I'm so-and-so and this is where I live, or they don't have to. Now, my observations are there is a bit of tension about making sure people who participate in surveys are residents. And if that's something that's still in the front of consciousness, there are other survey platforms, for example, Polco, that ties in with voter information. So in that case, if you want to go and do the survey, you have to enter your name and your address, and this checks to see, does that person actually live there? That's a bit more involved, a bit more of a cost to set that up and do that because they want to charge more for that. Another big survey question is who spreads word of the survey? Do you want to sit back and say, Carlisle Workman, you contact all the folks in the township? Or do you want to say, Ross, go send it to everybody? There are advantages to both approach, disadvantage to both approaches. If we do it, it's going to be a bit more expensive, obviously, because there's time and mailing and all that stuff involved. But it reduces demand on staff time so they can do other things. You can do it in-house. It takes some of the cost down. You guys have the mailing lists already available to you through the assessor, through the clerk, so it can go a bit more quickly. There is costs associated with that, but if you're clever, you can send it out with tax bills or even with just little postcards, and we can provide help preparing those materials. We have graphics folks who can do the fancy postcards. So if you're like, we want to mail it, but you design the thing, that's something that we can do too. So a couple decisions there. Do you want to go with the really tight survey or the more open online survey? And who gets the word out?
Yeah,
I mean, it should be people that live in the township. I mean, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, I think like at minimum, you should have to like put like your parcel number. I mean,
We
even
need
if
some
it's
type
not
of
like
verification.
certified, you know, like if you,
right?
I mean, the other option you said where you, Polco, is that what you said? That,
Yeah.
where they like, no, they're gonna send it to me because they would know I own the parcel here, and you said that's more expensive.
Yeah, well, it's a verification process
Yeah.
where they, through the voter records, they know who lives here and here and here and here. And if you're not a registered voter for there, they're going to say you can't participate. We'll take it, but it's going to be flagged as something else.
Seems like if you just put your name and address and maybe parcel number, then it would weed out people that are trying to
It could-
multiple comments.
It could work. I
or-
mean, we're not that large of a community where that can't be managed by staff.
Right.
It's going to be a bit of a time suck, but if it's just verifying, we'd have to weigh, what is the cost versus option A versus option B? What is the time that we'll need to put into it? I know as far as planning and zoning department, right now, we're pretty thin. We're kind of trying to still catch up on some things, but coming January, we'll have an extra person. That person is going to need some time to get trained, but they could potentially dedicate most of their time for some of those more menial tasks that don't really require a lot of experience. So
yeah.
it depends on when we're going to get the surveys out. I think that's really the biggest determining factor.
How did did Carlisle Workman do the Old Town Hall?
They did.
The survey,
Yeah.
okay, so it was, because that asked for the parcel ID and things like that. And it
That
was
one
pretty
was-
straightforward.
It was set up to be as secure as possible to ensure that
Yeah.
it's only residents or property owners that are responding.
Yes.
And did you verify them?
Yes, and it takes a while.
Huh?
Yeah.
But
It takes a
understand with using the parcel ID, you're gonna get people who don't live in the township.
But they should have a voice if they.
If they're a property
If
owner,
you
though.
use the voters roll, those people live here.
I think all residents and property owners alike, if they own a
Yeah.
property in
Yeah,
the township,
absolutely.
they should be
That's
entitled
right.
to some sort of input. You know, a lot of people own vacant land and they plan to build here in the future or plan to retire here or whatever.
Yeah,
They-
well,
they-
I guess my point here is this. What do most people do? Do they use a voter roll or the property list?
Most people aren't super concerned about non-residents coming in and stuffing the survey ballot, just because they don't have the same tensions that I've seen here with a couple of questions that have been in the air. And so that's part of the reason why they're not super worried about that. The other is that surveys help provide direction to this body and the township board who make the ultimate decision. So it's not like an election where this is what the survey says, this is what it'll be, because you guys and the township board get more information. So,
Right.
you know, people might say, we don't want any development in this section at all, but that's a section that has all the paved roads and all the sewer and all the utilities and is right next to Fenton, and so that's balancing. So the survey isn't necessarily the end-all be-all, it's an informative piece for your deliberative process. Would it be fair to say that there's interest in doing the more open approach, similar to the, okay.
I would think that would be my vote, a little bit more open, but still, verify and check it to make sure you're not just getting some outside comments from, that.
Mhm.
So some verification process, but not maximum security type.
Yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, I agree
Should
with
be
that.
that complicated.
And again, are you sorting out, if I own 3 pieces of property, do I get to go in 3 times?
Well, no, you're only one person, so.
Right.
Yeah.
But if I have 5 people that live at my residence, all 5 of them can make a survey response. And then that's what I'm
One
asking.
person, doesn't matter how many parcels you own.
Yeah,
I mean, are we gonna break it down to
What if you
how
rent?
many acres you own?
What if you rent, you don't get a voice?
Well, no, the owner of the.
Yeah,
of the
no, I
building.
think-
Like apartment complex.
Yeah,
So you rent there, then you don't get a voice?
right.
Is that typical? But if you went to voter roll option, they would still, because they would be registered to vote here.
Mhm. And so I guess to sort of put brackets around it, most communities are happy if they get 10 to 15% participation in a survey. I think for the townhouse it was somewhere around 18 to 20, so that was above what is folks are good with. So if I would say personally, if someone owns 3 properties and they want to go through the process of entering 3 things, that's kind of them saying this is really, really important to me. And so that, will come through that.
Yeah, but in the big picture, that's 3 out of, let's say,
3 out of,
2,000 people.
Yeah.
But again.
It all depends on
I
how
own
many
3
people-
1-acre parcels, I don't know 11, do I get 11 votes if they're getting 3? I mean, it
Yeah,
makes no
no.
sense. If you
Yeah.
got one person owning multiple properties, that's one voice.
Yeah, but for the survey, I don't think, like.
Are you gonna go in and vote 11 times?
No, I don't think people
No,
will
I'll
do,
vote
people
once, 'cause
won't
that's
do
how you
that.
do it.
Yeah,
You vote
exactly,
one
yeah,
time.
yeah. But that's, I think if we try to scrutinize exact levels of detail of
Mhm.
how we're gonna do a survey, that's probably not time well spent. I get, we should have some type of verification, like many of them mentioned.
well, and there are things too that you can do that are kind of middling, where, for example, you can say only 2 or 3 survey responses from this IP address. So you don't get 15 coming from a computer in one house. Now, if you've got 15 people who live there, that's a really big house, first of all, but then that would be a different story. And they could come in for a hard copy, or they'd call and say, why can't our other 12 people participate in the survey?
Okay, well then, the open approach is to use the voter roll, correct?
The
Registered.
tighter security,
Registered voters.
Yep.
the more restrictive would be to use the property listing.
I think I would actually flip those.
Yeah. Why would it be less restrictive to use the voter rolls? That would open it up to more people to participate.
But it would exclude folks who own property but don't live here or aren't registered to vote here. So if you're a snowbird and you're registered to vote in Florida or Arizona, that would flag you as not being a registered voter.
When it comes to renters and
I
things.
would guess that would be the other way around. A snowbird would be someone whose residence is here but goes to Florida.
But typically they have their primary residence in Florida too, so then you don't get the income tax. If it's over 6 months and then, but obviously there's all these different scenarios like you're mentioning.
Okay, but I guess what I'm
It's not gonna
asking
be perfect.
is how do we differentiate? Or do you just put the list together and anybody who wants to do a survey does a survey?
That's the more common approach.
So in the townhouse one, that was sent out in a mailer with, what was that sent?
The tax.
With
The tax bill.
The summer
So
tax
it
bill.
was people who owned property.
Yeah, so when is the next mailing going out? from the
Already got
township?
that process.
It's gonna be a while.
Yeah, it won't
It's
be
gonna be a
It's
while.
gonna need to be a
Okay.
separate-
And just making sure, then we know, okay, that's probably not an option, right, to do the same way.
Yeah.
Simply from that level.
Well, what I've heard from folks too is the reason we did that is it was quick and it's cheap because you don't have to pay any more for it to go out. I have heard from folks, and if it come to me this way, I would be guilty of it too because my property taxes are paid through escrow, is I would not have opened it and looked at the back until later when I'm filing things away. So
So how does mobile home community work? What are we gonna do with this?
If it were voter roll, then it would be all of those people that are registered to vote here would be included. Even though they aren't technically property owners, they are still residents if they register to vote here.
If they register to vote.
So, I mean, you consider both of the manufactured home communities that we have in the township, that's in excess of, 1,000 units, households.
That's why using the voter rolls is a wider.
Yeah, more people.
in that case,
Yeah,
yes.
wider.
Yeah, I guess. So if we have a survey that is sent out to our email distribution, and then you put a link on the township website, and then publish a notice, right, and like say Tri-County, then.
If we're doing that, we would want to do all of the above and potentially even mailers. To make sure that everyone gets the notice, because it's only a very small percentage
That
of
read
residents
or-
that are
yeah.
actually signed up for the email
Okay.
list, as much as we encourage it. The reality is, very few.
So it is very small. Yeah, I don't, okay, that's good to know.
Well, I'm not sure if we've set course on a specific tack. Would it be helpful for me to get more mechanical information about how the different platforms work?
What do we, I know it was a while ago, so maybe times are different, but what did we do last time?
Last time,
Previous master plan?
I'd need to look into that. I honestly don't think it's documented.
Scott might know. Scott was involved, right?
What's that?
On the previous master plan, do you remember a survey?
It was so long ago.
I know they did primarily visioning sessions, and they had
Yeah.
a few of them, and they did a lot of them during hunting season, where not a lot of participation, really.
It was kind of a rush thing because Gwen Obama came running in and wanted to buy that piece of property over there on the other side of the expressway. And then they were scrambling to get things going, and he backed out. I mean, because he wanted to do a lot of things over there, and his master plan really got pushed to that. I don't know if you read anything into that.
A little bit.
Yeah, so, but that seemed like that set the ball on fire, and we were racing to get it done.
Times were a lot different back then, and I don't know, I mean, we can obviously look back at historically how we did the things, like I mentioned previously, but I don't know if we necessarily want to model the master plan
Okay.
process around the last master plan process.
I
Just
guess
because
one
times
thing-
have changed significantly.
Well, one thing we need to know too is, what does it cost if we do the work, and what does it cost if you do the work?
What does Carlisle Workman bill out? 80 an hour or something like that. So 80 times however many hours. For mailings, it depends how robust. That's probably 3 to 6 hours plus the materials plus the postage.
Okay.
So
And
ba-
again, we're looking at the size of a survey of 20 questions?
Well, that's going to be my next follow through. Is there's all sorts of different approaches to these surveys. So, a couple communities that do their master plan 5 years on the button, they have a lot of questions that are exactly the same year to year, so they can track how things are changing. There doesn't seem to be documentation of survey in this current master plan, so that's not really something to explore now, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind that these are things we may want to track in the future. The size of it depends on the things that you're interested in getting community feedback on. So if you're interested in housing, you're going to have kind of a section that just talks about housing. If you're curious about lakes, natural environment, parks, so kind of think of it as modules of things that you want. I know there are a couple communities where broadband is really important and like single trash hauler, so they're kind of very specific questions. My advice is you kind of start with the general modules and it gets really big, and then we feed it in and we test it, and like that took us half an hour, that's way too long. Usually 15 to 20 minutes is the maximum where people start to trail off and they don't click on the back or they don't hit submit because they're just done with it. So my question to you is, what are the important things that you want to get feedback from the community on through the survey?
Well, and the follow-up question to that is this going to be an online, or is this going to be a submission of a paper form, or both?
Both.
Do you have examples of like other surveys you've done in recent comparable communities?
Yep. I can bring those. I would like to, I'm a bit peculiar perhaps. I like to kind of have the fuzzy discussion before giving specifics, because then people get kind of caught up in this question or that question instead of thinking, what do we want to get from the survey? But I can certainly provide a number of examples from similar communities. All right, so that sounds
So I
like,
think the intent, right, Kurt, maybe I'm mistaken, is of the survey is to have as many people
Right.
that live in Tyrone Township or that own property here participate. That's, I think, all of our goals, right? We just don't want, you wouldn't want, in this day and age, if it's somewhere electronically where it's very easy to just keep submitting, put your thing on auto submit, which would be crazy, but things happen like that, and it's very simple, and people understand how to do that, unfortunately. It's just, I think that's the intent, so I don't know if that helps you, Zach, to say, hey,
yeah.
what should we go after? But,
So to help me bring in some examples for next time, are there any specific categories that you're particularly interested in getting feedback on? Transportation, housing?
I'd be interested to see if people want to do any sort of trash. Instead of everybody getting their own kind of.
Zoning.
So public services in general, just public
Yeah.
services. That's
6 million trucks on the road.
Yeah.
I think parks is one of the things that we want to look at.
so,
And to me, like when we use this master plan, most of the time, we're looking at the future land use map, right?
yeah,
That's tied in.
I mean, that's like,
That's the most policy specific for this body, yes.
yeah.
yep, and I think majority of what we've done and I'm just looking at the kind of the index of the master plan you see on the screen, but a lot of it has been around the US 23 corridor. And I feel that people, from what we've seen in the last year, people feel very strongly about that area, right? As we noticed as we went through the certain applications. So I don't know what gets lumped into that. Obviously, what John said, the future land use map, we, in almost every application, we look at that and we have to review it. So that would.
Well, and one thing from my a bit outsider perspective is that there's a tension along US 23 because it's the face of the community for most of the people, right? That's what you know.
Yeah.
And there's the tension of wanting to maintain the rural appearance, the rural presence, but also the acknowledgement that that's where all of the cars are and that's the easiest place to get services and that's where the sewer pipe runs. So there's the tension of wanting to keep the face as natural as possible versus that's the natural spot where development wants to happen. So it's definitely a very, very delicate spot to handle.
I guess the other item I think with, I don't know how many, Ross, you might know exact numbers of homes that are around the lakes that we have in our township. I don't know, but there's a lot, right?
I can find that number, but
I
it's
feel
going to take some
that
time.
if we had a question on there that related to like short-term rentals, that we would get a lot of participation in that survey from the lake community. But I
More likely
just
than not,
in general, like some things that, like what would people care about, what would be good feedback for us, is something that isn't addressed in our current master plan,
Yeah.
is that, right? It wasn't a thing back then, I don't think. It might be specifically prohibited. I can't remember.
We
exact
don't regulate
regulations.
short-term rentals currently at
Yeah.
all in our zoning ordinance, and if I recall correctly, it's not addressed in our master plan.
Yeah.
So for our township board liaison, master plans can also be a tool for kind of the bigger policy questions. We already heard here single trash hauler. Roads can be of interest. So it's not necessarily just planning stuff, but if you have conversations with other township board members, you want to get feedback from them in there. Some communities have used information from master plan surveys to say, hey, we're going to float a road millage because everyone says fix the roads. And so we know we float it, we'll do it, and people will see the roads versus having to go through the process not knowing.
Kind of like Center Road.
Center Road, Running Lake Road,
Yeah.
Linden Road, a lot of the roads. Yeah. There's a lot of public interest in the condition of the roads. That's something that's been consistently an issue.
All
But it's important to know when we talk about roads that the township owns 0 miles of roads.
Correct.
I mean,
They're either private or it's Livingston County Road Commission.
Yeah.
So they don't really care about us.
However,
so
to that point, the road commission really, they try to match with municipalities. They don't put 100% investment into our roads. They want to see something from the municipality. So in a sense, we don't own the roads, but we're in a way responsible for.
If you want more done with your roads, you got to be proactive about it. Otherwise, the road commission's going to come whenever they come.
They're going to do the bare minimum.
And so like some communities, I'm going to pick on Scioto, which is west of Ann Arbor again, through their master planning process, they created a road millage and they have like a road committee. So they have a road plan. So they have folks who are right on task of knowing when they can qualify for certain federal monies and tip stuff so that you get to expand your money by getting stuff from the county, from SEMCOG, and the road commission. But it takes a lot of effort to do that. So you don't own them, but if you're active, you can pull levers to get it better.
Zach, so in your experience, like on a typical survey, how many topics can you address in an effective survey? You know, you can't put, we might go through the master plan and say, yeah, we all these are important, but realistically, is there like, okay, you put 4 topics on there.
Yep.
That's
So
realistic. And then we can come up with a list and say, well, these are the top ones. And then,
So part of, if you put it in modules, it won't feel as big. So if you have a group of transportation and a group of this, it can feel a bit smaller. With that said, if you have more than, I'm going to say around 7 major categories, it tends to get draining on folks.
okay, yeah.
But it could be like 6 and a potpourri. So don't think everything has to be in a family.
No, but I think for us, like, to decide on what these topics are, we can put a list together, and then all of us can, in one of these meetings, say, well, we agree on the top one is this, and go down. Otherwise, we could discuss like this for months without actually having a survey go out, is my fear, right? Where there's a lot of things in this plan that we have to, at some point, say, here's the big ones, and then go from there. So the survey, really, realistically, from the time we tell you what the topics are, to get it out, what is that, like a month? I know you have general timelines in your...
Yeah, that'd be pretty accurate. So once you give us the direction, we can start with we can generate a bunch of questions, and then you guys are going to want to bless them, I suspect, before it goes out. And so, at least a month, let's say, from one meeting to the other, with some potential follow-up and polishing. So 4 to 6 weeks from that initial, here are the categories we want feedback on.
So are your questions generally check the box, or yes or no, or something like that, or are you requiring some verbiage on them?
Some of both. So my approach, and there's an art and a science to writing surveys and survey questions, is I'm going to pick on Argentine Township now. They wanted to know about their public services, if folks were happy with the fire and police. So start with a leading question of, have you had any contact or interaction with the fire department or police department in the past 5 years? Followed up with, if you have, how would you rate your experience? Yes, yes, yes. A description of what services are provided. We have this many patrol officers, this many trucks. Do you believe the services are adequate? With a very open-ended question. Just, do you have any other comments on public services in Argentine Township? So if you make too many of them essays, people will get annoyed and won't know what to do. But if you don't have any essays, you're going to miss out on a lot of information and potential good ideas. So I believe in having some really simple, defined ones, because that helps processing and it helps folks kind of focus, and using that to lead to get them to be creative for the end of category essay.
How long would you have the survey open? 4 weeks, 6 weeks?
Most communities, in my experience, are somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks, but it depends how aggressive you are in getting the word out. If it's a bit more chill, then you're going to want a little more time, so you have more opportunity for folks to be aware of it and participate. But there is diminishing returns if it's open 8 weeks, 2 whole months. If folks weren't interested in that, they're not going to come in afterwards. It already sounds like you have a pretty good idea of how to get the word out through lots of different channels, so it'll probably be towards the shorter side. If for me, I'd probably have it somewhere around 6 weeks.
So if we set a date for a survey to go out sometime in February, the end for responses would be roughly the end of March, correct?
Yep.
Is that doable?
I believe it is, yeah.
Fact that we haven't given you a whole lot of direction yet on what the survey is going to consist of,
Yep.
and what the topics are, and all that kind of good stuff.
It's certainly possible. My homework, my challenge for you guys is to think of the big categories. I already have some idea of what they are, so I'm going to start working on my list back at the workshop. So it's not like I have to wait to get it to do any work on it. I'll already have some prepared, and so if the next time we convene, you have an idea of the questions, then we can start with the larger one for you to edit down.
So you need from us, like, hey, these are the topics we want to have on this survey. Understood. Thanks.
Because I would like to try to, get some realistic timeframes put together so that we can work towards those, so we know what we have to do. We have to come back next time with topics. We have to come back with the time after that with answers to this, and this.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, any other thoughts on the survey now, or we have a pretty good idea at least where we're headed?
Yeah, I think, like, for us, then, we need you to get you those topics in January, right, realistically. And then we can.
Or maybe if we want to make that the focus of the workshop,
Yeah.
try to identify everything by the end of that meeting, start talking about it, start thinking about it.
Yeah, and then it's,
together.
Yeah, I like that. We need to have, what do we need to have done by next meeting? Now we can think about it.
Yep.
I hadn't really thought about this one, but next Wednesday.
Next
And
one.
the other topic you brought up, Zach, was a steering committee, and I don't know.
That's you guys.
Yep, and which we established that, but as far as the, like a smaller subcommittee of it, Ross, I don't know if that, in Zach's report here, he mentions it can be members of multiple different bodies, right? And which, is that something that you have heard input from the other bodies that they want to be part of? I know I sit on the ZBA and no one there really has mentioned it except for the fact that.
Specifically, no, I have not heard any.
Regarding-
Anyone asking about that, inquiring about that. I mean, I think that the general expectation at this point is that the planning commission is going to spearhead the whole thing, but that does not necessarily mean that it has to be that way.
Yeah.
If that's something that you ultimately decide and you want to suggest, then it's something that could be considered.
Yeah, and so the makeup of the groups that work on this in communities vary greatly. So like if you're a community that's getting a bunch of variances, it's important to have the ZBA guy in the room to say, fix this thing, I'm sick of seeing variance requests for this. If there is potential tension, I don't want to say tension, just different perspectives from township board than planning commission, it's good to have that voice actively in the room too. Now with this body, we've got township board representative here, so it sounds like there's general support for the approach that you guys are taking.
Yeah, and I think for small things, like a subcommittee is fine. Like I think Ross, is what you mentioned, where hey, is this a fitting picture, or like we had mentioned in our last revision was, hey, that water tower's gone. Why is it in the picture? That kind of thing. So nothing. It's not like you're acting on anything. All right.
All right.
That's. I think we good direction there.
So the next kind of big question thing is, I'm going to go on to page 3 here, the task 2.1, and something that affects the scope of work is how much and what type of demographic information do you want to look at? So some communities are really basic. Here's what our population was in 1990, here's what it was in 2000, 2010, 2020, boom. Others get more refined where they want to look at the different age distribution. They want to look at male versus female, people who've lived here versus migrants. They want to look at how do they compare with neighbors. Are your neighbors growing or shrinking? How are you relative to that? The more robust it is, the better understanding it gives you, but it makes the document bigger and requires more time to pull those. Now, we do have the benefit that the census data is dropping as we speak, so you guys get the latest and the greatest. So I don't know that we need an answer for that now, Do you guys have any questions or thoughts on how big you want to look at your demographics?
Like, how have we, over the last 10 years on the current master plan, how have we used those demographics and anything?
We try to consider that when we're making any changes to the zoning ordinance, or regulatory ordinances, we try to take into account the information on the master plan. As far as demographics specifically,
Well, you also have to take a look too at age for services, because
Yeah.
families are gonna require different services than to retired people. So you wanna take a look at things like that, and also, I think, male and female helps to get an idea of what your demographic is for what kind of services that people are gonna be looking for. Will we know in our demographics how many people work outside of the township?
There are ways to mine that, yes.
Okay.
Now, with the 2020 census, there was a bit of a change. They used to have like the long survey where you did all of those details. They scrapped that a bit for a rolling American Community Survey that they do every year. That's, my experience has been the best place to get that more fine, detailed information, with the caveat that because it's a much smaller survey and with their sampling methods, there are some times where they'll put a big asterisk that says, we didn't get a hold of a lot of people, this may be garbage.
Okay, because there's two issues that I look at with that. In 2010, this was a commuter area here. Most people who lived in Tyrone Township, for the most part, a lot of them lived out, worked outside the area. Now, we may not have that same situation now, specifically because a lot of people are working from home. So you don't have the commuters that are driving down to Livonia every day or up to Bay City or wherever you're looking at. So again, you have a different set of needs. And as you look at that, how many people are running businesses out of their homes now, which require a permit?
as far as what's regulated, not that many.
Yeah. Well,
The ones that we know of.
That we know, yeah, that's the other.
Now, as far as your question about commuting and all that, are we gonna be able to get that from the census data?
I think we can,
But,
yeah.
I mean, to me,
That's one
that,
of the items, yeah. That's one of the things that's included in the census.
oh, it is? But was that pre-COVID? I don't know when that went out. It was-
So the American Community Survey is on a rolling basis, so we can look at the more recent stuff versus the old stuff, and we can see, was there just a huge drop off in 2020? And with the very logical conclusion that everyone stopped commuting because they were working at home. So that's something that as we look at the data, we should pop.
So, regarding the census and all the data, so it's releasing, usually it releases in 2020 on the 10s, right? What, or is that the date when
That's-
does the count happen, is what my question
April
is.
1st, 2020, wherever you happen to be sleeping that day
In
is where they
2020.
count it, yep. And the processing has been long and tedious. Not all of the information has been dropped yet, but the biggest, most important stuff has in the past 6 to 9 months starting to drop.
But all this data that's dropping was captured in the beginning of 2020.
Yes.
Is the biggest point, because since the beginning of 2021, I have, I think, maybe 15 additional neighbors that would not have showed up on this census data, right?
Yeah.
And I think that you could drive around our township and see that in mine just in one spot, right?
Yep, and
So-
since a couple years have passed since that survey, one of the things that is good practice is to look at the American Community Survey and say, does it look like the trend is continuing or is it reversing? One of the things we saw Argentine Township is they were growing and growing, and then the last 10 years just it stopped. So the American Community Survey will give an idea of the general projection, And one of the nice things is SEMCOG is brilliant for this type of data too. So they have projections, so we can even look forward to say what is the probable population going to be in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. All right. So my takeaway is that you guys are interested in more robust background information, kind of similar to what you've got. There's a couple, the commuting thing wasn't really addressed in your last master plan. I would presume similar direction for things like the housing. So that's the number of units, how many people living per unit, and the economic stuff that you guys want a little fuller picture than less, at least consistent with what's in here.
Yes.
All right. All right, my next big question is what communities, and I love this part because I get to learn about different geographies and how communities act. If I were to look at, say, 3 or 4 other communities' master plans, which are the 3 that you say, Zach, you have to go look at these to understand how things are going around us?
That's probably, you know,
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna be looking at the ones automatically that are adjacent to Tyrone Township. So that would be Fenton Township, Holly Township, whatever, it is, Rose Township, I guess is what it is. South of us is Heartland, Argentine, Deerfield.
Now, of those, which are the 3 most important or influential on what happens here?
Based on us having US 23 going through, Heartland and Fenton, for sure. That's something that we need to consider. Just because that is where everyone who lives in the township goes to one or the other for their shopping, their general.
And so would it be useful for us to also look at City of Fenton, I'm presuming?
I think so, only from the, they're the elephant in the bed next to us.
Well, in my work with Argentine Township, they're not contiguous. There's actually quite a big gap. But they said, yes, look at that because that's where we all go shopping and do things at. No love for Little Byron or Gaines, I guess, but.
Well, and I think from the perspective of Argentine mirrors Tyrone Township a little bit. They're kind of in the same boat. They don't have the major expressway running through it, but they do have the area of retail. They do have the areas around the lakes. They do share space with Fenton Township and with us. Well, technically.
Well, and they share your water once you're done with it.
Yeah.
They have fire and police too.
Yeah. What else? Who else would you want to see?
I think Deerfield, because it's kind of a, still a preserved area.
It's a similar bedroom community type
Yeah.
situation.
I mean,
They don't have a
as
lot of
much
development.
business as we do.
Right.
Except for gravel pit.
All right, now I have a list of kind of other agencies I look at, but I want to hear if there are any specific that you're like, this is really important for us to be aware of. Anything pop into mind? So I know I'm going to want to look at the road commission's improvement plans. I'm going to want to look at the county plan. The county has a parks plan, those types of things.
I'm done. Almost everything we mentioned, we talked about the highway going through there.
I agree.
Almost every development we talked about traffic on the ramps and the highway.
And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I don't think they're going to put an exit entrance on at Fawcett.
No, but if we ask them that they can, you know, we could, you know, get input from them or
Mhm.
share our vision.
But I think it's good for us to review what
Yeah.
maybe they have in their plan, and we can.
Yeah, well, if they plan to make this 3 lanes or 4 lanes or
Yeah,
some weird
exactly.
shoulder thing, that's very impactful.
Flex lane.
Well, that's going all the way to Brighton next year, I think, from Ann Arbor.
Yeah, it's going to Brighton and then from Brighton it's gonna go to
Yeah.
Novi.
What is it, 22?
Yeah,
Yeah,
That extra lane is.
it's not going all the way though.
the flex lane.
There's still one more section after
Oh,
that.
that's,
Yeah, that's
Coming up here?
It's moving closer, yeah.
That's the dumbest thing there
Oh, that's debatable.
is. Just open
It's-
anything open.
There's pros and cons.
It,
Well,
I was actually sitting in the room at the Washtenaw Area Transportation Study when that
They can't do that.
discussion was done. And the reason why they didn't put a full lane is in order to meet federal highway standards, it doubled the cost per mile because you had to do shoulder, and in order to get the shoulder to fit in, they had to go way over on that side, so.
if you don't want the federal money, then yeah, you can put it in. But, you know,
Yeah,
Yeah, not
Wait,
for,
they're doing this.
not for our
Allow more
meeting
traffic
to
now,
decide.
speed limit.
it's because we just shoulder it.
All right, I think I have a good handle on that.
I think one of our last meetings, we mentioned about sewer or things like that. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's.
That needs to be part
Yeah,
of it.
definitely.
It should be looked at. as far as-
Genesee County WWS would be towards the top of that list.
Yep, I actually had in contacts with them from Untitled Township this month too. Just out of curiosity, do all the lakes, are they all sewered now, or there's still some?
Lake Shannon, no sewer.
we're not sure.
When I was in Steuben County, Indiana, they were in the process of getting sewer districts on, and people were they didn't want to do it because it was a long system with pressure and you had to do all this stuff. The health department had the most effective demonstration. They would get the red dye, squeeze it in the toilet, flush it, they'd go out to the water, and it was already out there.
That's how
People
Lake
like it.
Tyrone,
Yes.
that's how they got Lake Tyrone to connect, but Lake Shannon, I think it might be a different situation because it's a man-made lake, potentially. I don't know the reason. I know that there were plans in the past for sewer around Lake Shannon, but that just fell off. Nothing ever materialized, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is something that I can verify, that the Livingston County Regional Sewer System, which is our shared sewer system between us and Heartland Township, they do have in their master plan some consideration towards connecting at least Lake Shannon. Sullivan Lake is a little bit off the beaten trail. It's not, as far as distance from the sewer system, that's not to say that it's something that shouldn't be considered. It absolutely should be considered, but it's a smaller lake.
My septic's up in front by the road, so I'm way away from the lake.
Yeah.
All right, my next seed for discussion is inventorying existing land use. And for those of you who have your current survey, you have the categories on page 39. And so how this affects the scope of the project is SEMCOG has pretty good information. And if you're happy with their categories, it's relatively easy to do. If you want different categories, then it becomes more time consuming to try to ferret that out. So what SEMCOG bestows upon us, the different use categories are agricultural, commercial, industrial, government, institutional, single-family residential, multiple-family residential, park, recreation, and open space, water, transportation, communication, utilities, and airport. And you have 0 acres of airport, if you were wondering, in 2008. So the question, and if you want to answer this now or think about it later, is are you happy with those categories, or are there others that are important, or is there fine tuning in there? So for example, it just says single family residential. One of the things that you might want to look at is, are there different densities and where are they scattered?
Well, you know, as we look at development as it goes through here, whether it's a PUD or a CDO or whatever, I suppose it's important to know on single-family residential, do they have that broken down by, I don't wanna say lot size, but let's say the amount of land that it makes up? So there's not a way to find that out.
Yep. Well, and one of the things that I haven't been able to get a good handle from them either, and this is especially so in the thumb, you can have 160 acres with a house on it, and 158.5 acres is farming. What are they counting that as?
Yeah.
And they weren't able to really give good direction, so. What I could offer is if we use the existing categories, that's a relatively low cost of entry to get the information and through the process. Once you guys see the information in the maps, if you're like, I'm more interested in ferreting this detail out, that's something that we could do also.
It seems like it would be good to keep them the same, and then we could compare.
Well, we
Right.
still could have the same, but then have a sub.
Yeah,
Lot size
like you
72%.
said, yeah.
Still could
Yep.
compare it,
Break it down and
Yeah.
go into it.
and then in the future, we can compare that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the nice thing too about keeping those categories is you're able to track differences over time. All right. Next thought for the scope is natural features, and what are the natural features that are important for you? Your current master plan looks at rivers, lakes, and streams, woodlands, wetlands, and steep slopes. Most of that information is relatively easy to find. I'm on page, well, it's map 2, page 41, I think. Most of that's relatively easy to update. One that's not in here, but if you have the dam controlled lakes, it's less of an issue, is the floodplain, the 100-year flood area. So those natural features still seem important, or is there any other ones that you're particularly interested in? And while you're thinking, some communities that are very interested in agricultural preservation will also look at their preserved properties, their public act, I forget, a 416, 451, or something that has some sort of state tax incentive to remain agricultural for a while.
Would that be, when you talk about that, are those communities usually, do they usually own that land?
No, for that PA, and I'm so embarrassed I can't remember the number. I can spit it out in the middle of the night half the time. You own the property, but in exchange for getting reduced taxes, you pledge to only use it for agricultural purposes for a certain amount of time. I think it's 5 years or 10 years. And so after that, you can do whatever you want. If you want to keep doing that, you have to keep doing that. There was a bit of an adventure with that in solar farming, where folks had it under that preservation tax plan, and they want to put solar farms up. And the state initially was like, that's not being preserved for agriculture. Their argument was the solar panels are literally sitting on the ground. In 15 years, when they're no longer functional, they come off and we've got farmland still. I believe the state has actually changed it now so that certain solar installations, you can still get that. So is there interest then in a bit more agricultural preservation, natural feature?
I think you could put that in there. I mean, the township focuses on rural aspects of it, and certainly the agricultural aspect of it is what makes it rural.
Yeah, and obviously, for me personally, I appreciate it, and I like it, right, when that's what you look at, it's awesome, but there's a realistic side of it where, hey, if I really want to have it to look at, I better buy it, right? You know, as a resident, so that's why I asked that question, like, who owns it? And so then, like, for us to do that, it would probably involve, like, canvassing our landowners to say, would you be open to this or want to do it, right? I don't know how that works. I don't see any other way to do that. It's not like they're gonna,
Well,
it seems like they already would have approached us for that, is my understanding.
Yeah, for the public act, the tax stuff, they have to go to the assessor for that whole
Yeah.
processing. So if anyone's currently registered with that information is available in here. One of the things for agricultural preservation is there is purchase of development rights that communities can do. I'm going to pick on Ann Arbor right now. I think it was 20 years ago they decided, let's tax ourselves to buy property around the city so no one can build on it. They didn't talk with any of the townships they were buying property in, and they were very upset because now the city of Ann Arbor, a non-taxable entity, was buying up all these chunks of property. They eventually changed it so they just buy the development rights, which basically means you can have a house and keep farming on it or keep it woodland, but we've purchased the right to split this property in the future. And so they've taken that on themselves. Community just north of Dexter, where I live, Webster Township has done that themselves, where they have a millage that funds purchase of development rights for farms. And in order to feed that program, one of the things they looked at is what soils are good for farming. So they're kind of general categories. Prime farmland, which means you put a plow out and seed out, you're going to get a farm. There are ones where soils are good if it's drained. There are, what's the next category? Farmlands of local, or soil of local importance, and the last category is don't try to farm there. So part of their master plan is that map that shows here are where the important farmland areas are. So when they're making the decision of we want to purchase development rights here, they can know, is this a place that we need to keep farming?
I guess we'll have to think about that.
Yep.
Yeah, to start with, I think the ones we have is pretty good, seems like.
On to the next page. Are there any, we already talked about the sewer and trash, but are there any other infrastructure or public services that are important to explore in this? I heard roads also.
Roads.
Would that include any of like the broadband stuff?
Yep. So, and how it ties in is if you, for example, have traffic issues or you just want to make it easier for people to have their own business or work from home, is they need to be able to do that. And so, you know, one of the survey categories could be, do you have high-speed internet? What speed is it? Do you like it? Would you do something else? I know there's a community that used input from that type of a survey to, you know, we're going to do a millage, everyone gets fiber optic to their house. And they actually timed it perfectly because the system was rolled out just as the pandemic was locking everything down, and they're sitting there streaming Netflix and Hulu and Apple Plus and everything. So that's definitely within the scope.
Yeah, Livingston County just sent out.
They have the county-wide
Surveys,
broadband
yeah.
survey, yeah. Yeah, that's something that, from my personal experience, people do frequently contact us about. I know where I'm at in Tyrone Township, there's no broadband available, there's no cable internet available. Exactly.
Comcast?
I have satellite internet from a pole
Yeah.
a few miles away. That's, which I don't know, I'm fine with, but a lot of people have issues with it, especially if you're working from home.
Yeah.
All right, well, I have pretty good direction on that, and we meet again. I'm sending you off to let this bubble in the back of your head, so get anything more, contact Ross or we'll bring it to the meeting. The next one that needs to be defined is your vision for the vision sessions. And part of that is, are there any specific groups? So last time my understanding was kind of one big meeting where you talked about everything. That's one approach. You could have specific topics So like, remember how we have the different categories for the survey? You could have one, we're gonna talk about housing, we're gonna talk about infrastructure and public services. So the folks that are interested in those can come out. One interesting thing that I saw Fenton Township did, I've already doing homework looking at their master plan, is they had different age groups. So they had like a study group with school children. So they had some volunteers or detainees from elementary school, and they had them part of a vision session. They had teenagers, they had older folks. It was really interesting. They actually pointed out there that the things that the middle schoolers like and don't like about the community is very different from the high schoolers. So again, you need to answer it tonight, but think about what will provide you information from vision sessions. So in addition to the groups, the different age groups, you can have focus groups. So you could have one for farmers, one for whatever, one for the specific area. So US 23 corridor is important. You could have one just come in, we're going to do vision sessioning for US 23. Or other geographical things. Part of your master plan currently has it in the different quadrants. So you could have one for northeast, one for northwest. Any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I get my thought, I think in another meeting, like we've already mentioned, is that the 23 corridor, I think it's very helpful, right, for every application almost we get, we talk about it. I don't know what the others think, but the lakes certainly, but I don't know.
So you're thinking broad categories like a visioning session specific to the 23 corridor, and then a visioning session for lakefront.
Yeah, and specifically like for an example.
Agriculture. And
Yeah, for like the 23 corridor, right, we've had some things in there about like offices or, like, which now if we're all realistic, that's probably not gonna be what someone comes here to put in. They're not gonna put in an office space, right?
Oh, the future land use map,
Yeah,
especially special planning
it
areas
kind of-
like that,
That's where I think
Yeah.
we should all, we should say, hey, well, the plan
like the
a
pyro.
decade ago probably
Yeah.
doesn't match what realistically would happen or people would want to develop, right? So then we should plan for something different.
You know, like the new way of life is gonna,
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
and it's not gonna go back.
All right. So my takeaway is that there's an interest in having several different visioning sessions with some kind of specific focus to be determined, the exact number and
Probably
focus.
somewhere in the area of 4, I would think, would be adequate.
All right.
Yeah, and I think that kind of aligns with what topics we say, hey, these are the most important for our survey.
Yeah.
It probably will line up.
Plus, we can also combine some things.
Yeah.
All right, so for these next couple ones, I'll kind of give a fuzzier thing. So generally, most of the public input at that point is done until the public hearing. So you had a survey, you've got visioning sessions. We kind of go and start to cobble things together, which means we're going to be developing goals and objectives, the future land use map, the sub-area plans, or a couple of those we've already identified, and perhaps an implementation plan. So my question is, do you want to work at getting public input, feedback on those in progress, or do you want to wait to the end? And why it's important is if you have a draft document and you want to tap the brakes to get public involved, that adds a bit of time.
So the answer to that is yes.
All right.
At least I would think that's what we want.
I think so.
I mean, that way, you're not gonna surprise people with what the final product looks like, and they say, well, wait a minute, we didn't really have much input on that. And unfortunately, just because you have input doesn't necessarily mean that's gonna go into the master plan. And, you know, I think that's one thing that's gotta be clarified to everybody. The job of putting together the master plan rests with the planning commission. Is the planning commission's job to get input from the public, not necessarily to put everything in that the public wants, because that won't happen. You're never gonna please anybody, and we know that.
Yep. It definitely is a best practice to get feedback on the way for sure.
Yeah.
In many communities, like I said, once they're done with surveys aren't even required, but most communities, when they're done with the survey, that's it. So it's definitely a best practice. One of the other things that will affect the scope, and in my view, the value of this, of any master plan, is if you want to have an implementation plan. So by implementation plan, I mean kind of a very specific, here are things we want to do in this year and who's responsible for it. Here's things we want to do this year and who's responsible for it. My experience has been that when you take that approach, you're much more likely to get things from here into the real world. It's not a requirement of master plans, but it does take a bit of time to develop that and figure out realistic timelines. But I will tell you too, as an elected official, it's useful because you can start to plan and look budget-wise. You know, in year one, we're going to do zoning ordinance. That's going to be an investment, and you know, I'm going to pick on a community that's doing a bunch of trails. They know they're going to have to build the trails, but then they're already starting to think, we're going to have to maintain these and clean them off from snow and that type of stuff. So is there an interest in including an implementation plan? It can be very light or very detailed to suit.
Well, I think in order to make the master plan look like it's something other than something that sits on somebody's shelf, you need to have, this is what we're going to try to do. But again, I look at, if you'd asked me in 2019 what I thought we were going to get done in 2020, it would be a whole lot different than what actually happened last year.
Yep.
And nobody knows how to plan around things like that. So, from my perspective, yes, you want to have what we think we want to do, and yeah, when we think we want to do it. But with realizing the fact that there are other things that happen that can change the, you know, the whole orientation of that plan.
Yep. And I guess the way I like to describe it to folks is it's kind of like a capital improvement plan where you're setting priorities, not necessarily this thing is going to go in this year. It's just kind of outlining your wishes, your desires for how you're going to get there, but it's not a strict, tight document. All right. I think I have answers to the biggest questions I have for helping prepare the scope. So my homework is I'm going to meet with Mr. Luan, and our homework is to prepare the scope and work plan, tidy this up, bring that information to you guys, and I am going to begin collecting the master plans information from those communities you identified, in addition to the ones I've already pulled. I am collecting surveys already, and your homework is to think of the different categories of things that you want to learn from the survey. Similar for visioning sessions, how you want to group that, and if there are any specific groups or areas. And the land use categories isn't necessarily a right now decision, because that will develop as we go throughout the process. All right, I think that was pretty good. It may not seem like it, but we touched a whole lot in very useful information.
Yeah.
So do you want us to get our information back to Ross and him to get it to you?
Yep.
Okay, so Ross, you need this by,
Ideally, I'd like to continue the discussion at the next workshop meeting next
Yeah,
Wednesday.
we're meeting next week.
So, I mean, as soon as you can, any thoughts that you have, just shoot them over. I'll try to put everything together, organize it as best as possible, and we'll have something to go off of at our workshop meeting.
Okay, so you want categories, and you don't care about the land use ones.
That can be developed in time. Unless if someone, if you're like, no, we want to have completely different categories, that's important to know now, because that's a much tougher task to create.
And just, sounds like, Zach, you kind of have what you need, and we're good on this agenda item, but the, one thing before I forget, just looking on the intent to plan letters, Ross, do you have a tentative when, hey, we're gonna send them? Or- I
They're
don't
pretty
know.
much ready.
Yeah, just curious.
I've been the only one in the department the last 2 weeks,
Yeah.
so. It's been tough. I haven't gotten them out yet, but they're pretty much ready to go. I still want to verify. I want to kind of triple verify, make sure that we have all the mailings correct, but for the most part, they're ready.
Yeah,
They-
so.
They can go out before the end of the year or early next year.
Yeah. I think it maybe would make sense in January, just my thought of it, I don't know what the others think, but instead of when everybody's going.
I mean, that's a
vacation
pretty
or
basic thing.
whatever,
It's just,
you know.
hey, we're starting our master planning process, so really there's not a lot of content to the notification, it's just the notification. And
Yeah,
making sure that
exactly.
we notify everyone who should be notified.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Yep, thank you, Zach, so. You guys have anything on that agenda item? Move on to the next one, PC action list, so we have some more items here. I'll just start at the top, and the one item that was previously completed in 2020 was the pool covers. We amended our ordinance to basically match the state. Did I summarize that right, Ross?
Well,
Not
the
that we have
state,
to
the
get
state
into all these,
currently,
but-
they allow for alternate enclosures, which include power safety covers that
Yeah.
are ASTM certified, and that's what we amended our ordinance to accommodate, because the majority of municipalities in Livingston County do recognize that, and they do allow for it.
Yeah.
So we just basically cleaned up our ordinance to consider those safety covers as an adequate enclosure, so that's done.
Yep, and then the animal units.
That's done, that's implemented.
And signs have.
Sign is, that we're gonna have to get to at some point,
Yep,
but that's been an ongoing thing since before I started here.
And it still is.
Yep.
In fact, Oxford Township last year, we rewrote their entire thing, their entire sign article to be Reed versus Gilbert compliant, which is the controlling. And then a case dropped in Troy, which would be our district, which was much stricter. The township's attorney said, stop. That was last fall. We're still stopped.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It's very tricky.
So my personal opinion on that one is, right now it's under the category of in progress, near completion. I don't think that's really accurate. I think we might wanna revisit.
no,
I
and
think we
from my memory, and when we reviewed this in the last years here, it seems like there was huge gaps of information missing, Ross, like, so basically, we'd have to do a whole new document, like you mentioned.
Well, the signs actually, they were in pretty good shape, except the last time that we had a public hearing, the document was not in a final format, it was in a draft format.
Okay, understood. So
That
content
never
was
really
okay.
got cleaned up. We had a lot of changes on the planning commission, we had a change in the planning consultant, and it just kind of dropped off. But at the same time, we did have the more recent court cases, more local, that play
Change
into it.
things,
Yeah.
okay.
So just given recent events, I think it'd be a good idea to move that down on the list, but still keep it towards the top of the initiated
Yep, understood.
category.
Thanks. And then the next one is the caregiver regulations, which we did do some work on previously, and then obviously, as the note you mentioned, is not complete. And I think this comment here talks about more research revisions and public hearing. I think it would make sense. It's been a long time since that public hearing. To take that document and just.
My personal opinion is we should check with the township board on what direction they want to go. I know that one of the things as far as the whole MMA in general, even prior to any recreational or adult use type situations, they wanted to revisit that after a few years to see how other municipalities were doing with it as far as medical, recreational, whole 9 yards. So the latest amendments that were proposed that we had the public hearing for, if my memory serves, was more or less to update it so that the terminology is consistent with the latest version of the MMMA.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
take away like qualifying, I forget the terminology.
Yeah, well, there was a court decision, I think, that opened that up for.
Yeah. It opened it up big.
Yeah.
So what he's referring there is that for the first decade of MMA, it was presumed that local units of government have no jurisdiction to do any regulations with what was explicitly allowed in there. I forget who the other party was, but one was Byron. I forget if it's village or township. Probably the township. They said you can grow your 12 plants in your house, but if you're going to do more than that as a caregiver, you have to do it through a special land use or in these certain areas. And the courts upheld that. And like chorus bells sing out around communities when they're like, we can stop people from growing 72 plants in the middle of a dense neighborhood, yay. So there's been a lot of movement in that this past year. A lot of communities have worked at that. So it's, in this case, it pays to not be the pioneer out front with the arrow in your back.
So my opinion is we should probably update the list to communicate with the board and see what their thoughts are on moving forward with it. Do we want to just keep it caregiver? Do we want to expand it? Do we want to reduce it? How much can we control based on, you know, the latest court cases, whatnot? Do we want to make it as strong as possible? Basically get some direction on it. Because I know from the very beginning when it passed, the board decided, yeah, we're going to allow caregiver operations to the extent which we can regulate them. But as far as any other aspects of it, we want to sit back, observe, and revisit. And now might be the time where enough time has passed where they have some data to consider.
From other areas, yeah.
Where are we at with businesses selling?
Right now, it's still, we opted out at the township level. That's one of the things that they said, we're opting out for now. We're opting out because right now is our last chance to opt out without it automatically being permitted. And they said that they wanted to revisit that in the next several years.
And the next item, master plan, so just have some notes here, and then, so the next item for us is to determine our top items, I guess you would call it. Top survey topics, maybe, is. Then the next kind of the sightline thing we were going through and then kind of got put on hold, and which is the next agenda item, so I won't go too much into that. And then open space requirement for CDO, and we had been going through revisions based on an application where we thought maybe some things were not clear or ambiguous, I guess we would call it. So this one, we were on hold, kind of saying, hey, what is the direction, or how strong can we make it or can we not, is my recollection.
Yeah, there were some issues identified with the text that we have as far as, like you said, ambiguity and potential ways to interpret things differently. That's something that fortunately doesn't come up all that often, but it is something that we do want to keep on the radar, as it's something that we'll likely want to task Carlisle Wolfman with, have Zach help us out with that one. That has a lot to do with the state statutory requirements, and, you know, it's not just us that's coming up with that. There's a lot more involved.
Yeah, the open space preservation is bequeathed down upon us by Lansing.
Yeah.
And so there's some very specific, one of the things that I will add to that is, if the planned unit development section and processes are good, everyone's gonna wanna do that instead of open space. And, it's something that belongs on the best plan is to wait until master plan is complete. But your PUD article could use some attention. It's kind of clunky. Your current master plan says we want to encourage this because it allows a lot more flexibility potentially in how you preserve and how you shape developments compared to conventional, and even compared to the open space preservation. But it's kind of a challenge to work through now.
Says some text amendments have been made. What, where was the?
Yeah, we had done that, and this was in, obviously now, was it in 2019, I think it was? And we were working on amendments, like in draft form, and then the PC changed members. And
I can
we
verify
changed
that tomorrow.
planners.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
but-
think that
but
anything
the-
actually made it through.
But where we got to was, well, what can we or can we not, like, say, hey, you're not allowed to do this, like, I think was where the planning consultant came into from my memory, Ross and Kurt, maybe you can correct me, Bill, if I'm wrong, but it was after that application, and
Yeah.
then we thought, well, maybe we don't have the right to restrict it that much, or vice versa. That was kind of how
What restrictions are we talking about? That's
so I'd have to look at the document, but, so there was, within that application, they were basically saying, hey, part of the yard is open space also, and there was
Lot open space.
lot open space calculations, and there was some ambiguity in how our ordinance was written as far as
There was
the
a
applicant was
question.
concerned. They were saying, hey, we feel this could be interpreted this way. And
is that the property next door?
yeah,
Yeah.
large. Yeah.
That's gonna be a big, major endeavor.
You're saying the property here that they were trying to develop?
Yes.
That they did the
Last
conditional
year.
rezoning application, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
So they were doing a conditional rezoning with a CDO with site condominium. It was one on top of the other, on
Yeah, I
top of the
remember
other.
those.
That really was the first time that we had to deal with a lot of that since we've had the zoning ordinance text in place.
Yeah.
And it really brought to light a lot of deficiencies within our ordinance. And those notes do exist, and I can
Yeah, and
find all of that information. Take some digging, but I can find that.
So that way, we're not really waiting for the planning consultant to be hired.
no, not anymore. I'm just leaving the notes to
Okay.
show like
Yeah.
the trajectory of where we came from and where we are. And I think the next item, the clarifications to conditional rezoning, it's lumped in with the same
Same story, same kind
same
of situation.
application that brought to light, hey, maybe you can interpret our ordinance a different way, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's something that, as the planning commission, you want to try to prioritize these items. Obviously, these are things that we will want to task our planning consultant with, but it's about how soon, what's most pressing, what's top priority here. My opinion, I think those would be lower until we get an application tomorrow. But
Yeah.
they're
Well,
much
but-
less frequent than.
But if we get an application tomorrow, we can't evaluate that application based on any changes we make, can we?
We would evaluate them based
So
on
if
current
we were
standards.
to
as
make the
they
changes,
change.
now's the time.
Correct, ideally.
Right.
But while we have applications and other priorities, it's all about weighing what's most important.
And our ordinance is there and it's available and it is.
There's some
and-
deficiencies,
and
but it's
there is-
not like,
It's not
it's
horrible.
not garbage.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a way that we can work with it. Some of it's just the question of, can it be open to interpretation? Can someone argue this? Which,
Everyone's
they
always gonna
could
find
argue
a way.
anything. They could argue anything from anything. And
Yeah,
They're
no,
always
yeah.
gonna find something. That's what they're good at doing.
We definitely want to tighten it up and make sure that everything is, good moving forward. We only have Zach, we only have me, we have limited time, limited resources, we only meet twice a month. So we want to make sure that we use our time wisely.
Thanks, Ross. And then the outdoor lighting
That's done.
is done. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is make reference to regulatory ordinance. So this is basically going through the entire zoning ordinance and ensuring that the regulatory ordinance that was adopted for outdoor lighting is, that there aren't any conflicts with the zoning ordinance text, which my mistake, that has not been done. The regulatory ordinance has been done. We still need to verify that there aren't any conflicts. None have been identified since the regulatory ordinance has been adopted. Not to say that they don't exist, that's kind of housekeeping.
What's the name of that regulatory ordinance?
That's gonna be residential outdoor lighting or
Got it,
something.
yep. I was looking under outdoor lighting.
Yep.
49.
Thanks, John. Then, I guess maybe at this time, it's just to keep it on people's minds what we have on our plates. And Ross, have we had any, just while we're on it, any, throughout the last year or so, any issues with any light, like from a nuisance or people?
Issues with the ordinance text, not so much. Once we adopted it, we did have a lot of complaints coming in, and we did have to initiate some enforcement because of it.
Wasn't there one on Running Lake?
That was the one that prompted the whole,
That-
the whole regulatory ordinance.
Yeah.
But subsequently, there's been a few neighbors here and there. I think my neighbor's light is too bright, it's shining into my window, this, that, the other thing.
Okay. And then, thanks, Ross. The future items, which we have had, the top items, accessory structure standards, which we have.
So I think we can say that some work has been done. We have some general notes.
Yeah, this is old no, but yeah.
And my personal opinion is that one, I mean, ideally, realistically, yes. Do we want to wait for the master plan? Yeah. I mean, we want to make sure that our zoning ordinance is, modeled off of the master plan to the greatest
That's about
extent that it
60%
can be.
completed, isn't it?
Accessory structures?
Yeah.
No. No, I would say in general, maybe about 10%.
Okay.
Just because it's such a broad category. There's some redundancy on this list of future items. I mean, we could potentially tie in, like the house's mother-in-law suites type category 8 there with accessory structure standards. I mean, that was my initial thought, is that that's tied in, that's where it would be best suited.
And number 3.
Well, tiny houses would be a single-family dwelling.
Okay, so that's different. Yep,
Yeah,
okay.
that would be a separate category in itself. And that's something that it was kind of a fad, that it hasn't completely disappeared, but there's a lot more interest that I have seen in past years. You know, it was something that everyone was interested in, and all of a sudden they wanted to find a piece of property where they could move, you know, basically a trailer that's a tiny house and live there. And not a whole lot of interest in that anymore.
Yeah, and I think on item number 1, Ross, I think that the size that we allow in our, was the big thing we were discussing
That's
with Dan, you know.
That was one item. though,
One of
others.
yeah,
One of many.
as far as one of the
that's what
item
we've
that
gotten
is
so
most
far.
often actually like at the board or us for say, hey, we want to build something that's bigger than what you allow. Right?
Yeah.
Most people are building bigger pole barns than what maybe we allow.
Well, we have
We have mechanisms. Yeah, we have mechanisms to review it.
We have that special process to allow,
Yeah.
in some zoning districts, LK1, R1, it's 800-foot max, but with planning commission approval, subject to public hearing, it can be up to 1,200, and a height increase of up to 2 feet. I'll need to verify my notes, but I think that the mindset was, that the general consensus was, we can increase the maximum footprint to 1,200, but still require the special review for height increase and several other things. I have all of that in my notes as well.
Yeah, we had done quite a few meetings on that, I think.
Yeah, we got somewhere. That's
Yeah.
not starting from scratch. We have at least a base. But that said, there's still a number of other items within that same category that haven't been discussed yet. But my opinion is, as far as at least the guest house's mother-in-law category, I think that we could just lump that into accessory structure standards.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what it would be, is an accessory to the principal structure.
And you covered alternative building materials, and obviously a lot of these items are maybe just like brainstorming, and like Ross, you mentioned the workload, what was realistic. We can go through them. I don't know if anybody has questions on
The alternative building materials, that basically came up with several people considering building homes out of shipping containers. Now, for storage units, for sheds, currently we prohibit shipping containers. That's something to be brought up during the accessory structure standard, but the alternate building material category there was specifically for someone trying to build a dwelling out of shipping containers. You know, take 10 of them, stack them on top of each other, however you do that.
So if, in that case, Ross, like if I wanted to build a home out of those.
So we're going to default for the most part to building code.
Yeah, that's what my question was, does that go through Livingston County?
We have some language in there that is friendly towards alternative building materials, but some that is not so friendly towards
Okay.
it. So it's just, that's a minor cleanup thing
Okay.
when we do get to that. But that is something that's, my opinion, lower priority than
Yeah,
others.
understood.
Because there are ways to get around it. You know, we do rely on the building department a lot when it comes to, well, 100% when it comes to enforcing building code. So if they're able to manage that, and our ordinance in that zoning district allows for some flexibility in architectural standards, then most cases they're fine. It's like an R1, LK1 zoning district where it would be difficult for someone to come in tomorrow and apply for a shipping container home that looks very modern with, you know, all sorts of features that doesn't necessarily mesh with the adjacent property. Doesn't come up.
I'll put that in there, that way we know, why it's on there, because.
Yeah.
Well, if lumber doesn't come down back to normal, you might see more
Oh yeah.
of that stuff.
Plenty of shipping containers out there.
Oh,
Not so much
there's a
lumber.
lot of them. You got ships, right? You can get them if you want.
They're not empty though.
Yeah, they're full of stuff to put in your house.
Right.
Tiny houses, which,
That's a separate category.
was just a discussion we were.
The
I think
fad
we
may
had
come
at one
back.
time, but-
Who knows? Time will tell. But as of late, I haven't received too many people looking for that sort of situation.
But in general, Ross, like from a high level, if I wanted to build a 1,000 square foot home, tomorrow I'd have to get,
So we do have minimum floor area requirements. For a
Yeah.
single story, right now it's 1,200 on the ground floor. If it's a 1.5 story, then it's 800 on the ground floor, and total of 1,250. 2 story, it's like over 1,200 with at least 900 on the ground floor, etc.
But-
So we have those standards, which is something that we could look at. I mean, that would be part of the discussion when we do eventually get to tiny houses, which in a way is just saying, are we going to consider smaller houses than we currently allow?
and I guess my question is, if someone wanted today to build one last, they would have to go through appeal, right?
It could be a ZBA. I mean, I think that that would be a dimensional variance that could be requested.
The bigger challenge for that is they have to prove practical difficulty with the property.
Yeah, no, understood.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, like, if someone truly had a reason other than, hey, I want to build for less money,
That's gonna be really hard.
which is going to be hard to prove, understood, like a hardship. But
The the only case I could make an example of where someone they should successfully be able to get a reduced lot is if they have a reduced floor areas if it's a really tiny lot. And so like the setbacks prevent them from building 1,200 square foot house. That would be an example. But if you have enough space for the setbacks, it's really tough to,
go under.
right,
whatever
because
the
it's
minimum.
mostly a personal issue, not a property issue.
Or if the lot was mostly wetlands. Maybe we'll see.
If it's
Maybe
reduced
see-
buildable area, yeah. There are some lots.
Tiny homes on White Lake Road?
Like, I think there's 3 lots right at the corner of Carmer and where Running Lake Heights goes in. There's 3 parcels there that are just ridiculously small. Nobody could ever build anything. A situation like that, potentially, I mean, for those, they might actually need to combine them, but it's.
But what are those setbacks on those lots? Are
They're-
those the same as everything else down?
Whatever the zoning district is, which I believe those are still LK1 or R1.
Yeah, you can't, yeah.
It's
So then
impossible. I mean,
then
they're
that's
very
where
difficult.
I would see that happening is
Yeah.
on a lake, right? Like if someone truly has an issue where they can't build,
The
then they would have
requests-
a mechanism to say, hey, here's my restrictions.
Exactly, and I could see that. But the request that I received at the time that this was put onto the action list, it was more or less for people to find a larger piece of property, an acre plus, and then still have the tiny home, which is
Yeah.
not something you could necessarily go. I mean, you could apply for the variance, but the likelihood of it being granted is
Yeah.
very slim.
So I'm going to tie it in. That's part of the value of having more fine detailed demographics. If you know we've got a lot of older folks and a lot of folks out of college in here, they're not going to want 4 or 5 bedrooms house generally. So that can help inform what you draft.
I think the environmental study requirements, I'm not sure on that one. Ross, what?
So that was brought up during the time that we had the application for the green cemetery, which
Okay.
is the same as the
So
next
it kind of
category.
goes to the next item. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's something that the likelihood of us getting another cemetery application, probably not that high.
Right.
But there's always a chance, and that is something that should be on our radar. It's just how high of a priority do you
Yeah.
want to place it?
Okay. So that's item 4. Yeah, those 2 items
Those
kind
2
of
items.
together, and then
Yeah, I know Livingston County Environmental Health was working on updating their cemetery standards because before they got involved with our cemetery application, they hadn't dealt with it in a decade or so.
okay.
So I don't know offhand the current status of that, but that's something that I can look into.
Yeah, that then it might tell us, hey, we're fine, or something. Limited lot waivers, and I don't know if we ever got into this discussion.
We never really initiated the discussion, no. That basically the limited lot waivers is allowing for outdoor storage of, an example is an RV on a lot where you can't necessarily store it in the permitted location, which would be, in most cases, a side or rear yard meeting the setbacks. Those are more common on lakefront properties, you know, small, narrow waterfront lots or just limited lots, as the title says, where it's not realistic. You know, I'll need to go back in my notes to verify exactly why we have it on there, because we do have the provision for limited lot waivers currently. I believe it's just a few potential deficiencies with that language.
Okay.
If I recall correctly, that one's just some cleanup.
Temporary housing, I think, was
That comes up pretty frequently.
some inquiries about, hey, can I live in my RV until my house is built, kind of thing.
That comes up a lot, and we do have provisions currently. The language right now is specific to construction trailers, that sort of thing, as opposed to travel trailers. We have historically allowed people to use travel trailers going through the process that we have prescribed in our ordinance, as long as they're connected to well and septic approved by the health department. I think that one is just some general cleanup as well, ensuring that we consider all situations, because it doesn't consider the situation of someone buying a property with a home that exists and then building a new home, allowing them to inhabit the existing dwelling during construction of the new dwelling, and then following, receiving a COO for the new dwelling.
We are doing that currently.
We are allowing that under our
That's where
temporary
it says,
housing
okay,
standards,
yeah.
but the ordinance text isn't very clear on that, and it's not specific. It's
Okay,
very
yeah.
specific to trailers or portable construction trailers.
It is in 1 year.
Yeah. We want to
We talked
revisit
about going to 2 years maybe.
potentially, which is more realistic, especially given, you know, the current
Yeah.
state of the economy. Because almost every time that we've issued one of those, we've needed to grant extensions. So why not off the bat allow a little bit more leeway?
A lot of these are just reviewing what we have and modifying.
Yeah, the applications will probably need to
Yep.
update, but
Yeah, there's more as we get more in or
Yeah.
off. And
we can remove some, we can add some, but that's not
Yep.
really the priority. It's
yeah, no, this list really is to
So
keep
one-
track and make sure we're.
Yeah, one thing I would recommend adding to the future items is based on the board's recommendation to revisit the private road standards as far as maintenance, upkeep, and paving of non-conforming roads, because of the request that we got from Running Lake Heights Association. And that could just be as simple as private road standards.
Yep. Basically, it would be to go through what we have and verify that it's captures what the intent of the township is, right? I don't know what.
Yep. Well, basically, what brought it to light is the Runyon Lake Heights is a very old subdivision. I think it was the 20s that it was platted, and it was platted as a cottage community. And there are other similar areas within the township that have non-conforming road systems. I mean, this one has 40-foot right-of-ways, if I recall correctly, whereas the current standard is 66. Our ordinance requires that you can do upkeep and maintenance, but if you are to pave a portion of a non-conforming road, then you need to bring the entire road up to current standards. And in some cases, that may not be feasible. So that's something that the board kind of wanted the planning commission to talk about and see if there may be some circumstances that would allow for paving if it's for safety
Yeah.
specifically.
Upgrade it to the extent practical. is what it should be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then applications, we can update it.
Yeah, as we go.
I can work on that.
Thanks, Ron. Next item on the agenda, Any other comments on the action list? Sightlines? Ross provided some sections of our ordinance to us, and basically, explain the illustration didn't show up. Overall,
There's not much to the illustration.
yeah, but in general, what we are faced with is, do we, as far as I see it, is, hey, do we regulate somebody and make it so they can't affect a neighboring property's sightlines, or do we say this is the setback from the water and it's the same setback for everybody? And there's kind of a lot of ways this one can go, and I know there's been many recent discussions on this at Township Board, so I don't know, Kurt, if you have
Well,
comments.
I think the question is there, and I guess maybe I'll pose this to Zach, is there something that we should or could be doing to make our ordinance reasonable in the eyes of people who are going to either suffer the enforcement or have to deal with the sightline issue? Sightlines are always in the eye of the beholder, and unfortunately, if all lake property was the same, it wouldn't be difficult. Unfortunately, you have coves, and you have peninsulas, and you have
Elevation differences.
all kinds of issues.
Vegetation.
And I know that there are sightline formulas, and we tried to develop some and weren't really successful at it. So I guess the sight lines that are used in Oakland County, where you've got, $2.5 million homes on it, are a whole different story than in this area. So I guess if you have some direction you can provide us, that would be helpful.
Yep. So, and I actually have a couple of examples here. Again, before we started pointing at actual text, I wanted to kind of have the conversation. So again, reminder for those who don't know, I worked in Steuben County, Indiana, that had 12 ski lakes, I think, which is very rare for Indiana, so water everywhere. And also Dexter Township, which had 4 or 5 ski lakes, many platted in the 10s. And Steuben County actually had plats that were platted before there was a road. So people would haul the lumber across in winter, they'd take the train up to land and get the boat across for the weekend. So yes, I've seen a lot of this. And there's a balancing between how fine-tuned you want it to be and how much effort you need to put into it. In general, so I've seen a couple of approaches. One is the waterfront setback is this, that's it. Everyone's got to be 30 feet from the water. That's simple, but if your concern is being able to see out, there may be cases where it doesn't quite work. There are approaches where you do averaging of like the adjacent house or the 2 adjacent houses. That kind of tends to sit it more in context with the neighbors. In theory, it does a little bit better with maintaining sight lines, but if you have houses in weird positions, not necessarily. I have one here from Webster Township, which has a weird measurement from the road to the back into both corners, and I don't even want to go into that. So there are really complex ways to do it. The one approach that I have generally preferred in my experience is kind of a mixed approach. So what we spent a lot of time doing in Dexter Township was working on the lakefront setback issue. Because again, lots of weird curves and stuff going on. There are also in the Fort Wayne moraine, so weird elevations too. And so the hybrid method they came up with is you have a traverse line that runs from this house to that house. And that's kind of the default starting point. Now, where it's the hybrid is there's a closest you can get to the water and the farthest you have to be back from the water. So the idea is that if the two houses were built in the 1915s and they're little cottages and they're 10 feet from the water, let's say 40 feet is the closest you allow, even though that line is 10 feet from the water, your house would still have to be set back. Likewise, if you're between two houses that are way back on the roadside, for whatever reason, you're not necessarily punished. You can go a bit closer, but not the shortest distance possible. The reason why I like that approach is it has some balancing so that you are paying attention to what's around you, but you're not necessarily punished if your neighbors are way back, and you're not rewarded if they're way up. Now, over time, over the long time, over decades and decades, that approach will lead to a bit of a creep towards a lake, but that's in decades' time. There is a bit of extra effort to it. So the way we did it is if you were building on the water, your surveyor had to go and show that traverse line. So just the water's edge facade of those two houses. So there was a little extra cost, but not substantial. We also paid really close attention to what things can go into that setback. There was a limit to how far overhangs could go in, to how far chimneys could go in, to what types of deck could extend into that, and it was generally decks that don't require railings, so less than 30 feet above the ground, or 30 inches above, 30 feet above the ground without it. That would be fun. And there is language in there that if you're on a point or a peninsula, you don't use the line, you use the average, and you just kind of run that along. The nice thing about the minimum is if you're in a cove, that keeps you back. So even though the line would tend to pull you closer to the water's edge, the minimum would likely be controlling in that case.
So is that in place right now in Dexter?
Yes. So that was my favorite, but it's a little more involved than just saying this setback and this back and averaging, or just drawing a line. I really do like having the surveyors do it because it takes the pressure off of staff. Again, a cost, but if you're building a new house on the waterfront or doing a major addition, the surveyors are a small cost associated with it.
That's good. At least we have something we can review, right? Review their ordinance and say, yes or no, that's something we like or don't like, or.
You can look at it as an example.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Like, hey, is that?
Well, and our whole problem is it easy to explain to someone, and two, will it stand up in court?
Well, and also, our current ordinance is the setback may be required by the planning commission, right? So what triggers that?
That's where
So
there's
a current house someone could build a house and move it up close as the minimum offset, and it was just maybe allowed. And then the neighbor could go build a house, and then they're gonna complain about it, and then the planning commission's gonna say, oh, well, now let's review it. So it's not treating everyone fairly.
Yeah, and that's the big issue, is making sure there's equal process.
Yeah, and on this, in our ordinance, in the footnote, it says the planning commission will do it if the setbacks of adjacent buildings are greater than the minimum. So that's the condition.
Procedure for
What
they
it doesn't
require.
do is it doesn't tell an applicant, like, what's gonna be calculated when and then further it says the planning commission has to determine it if it's on a cove or peninsula, but it doesn't tell them, well, how is the planning commission gonna arrive at this number? That is the biggest, it feels like, where there's no transparency of, hey, here's how we're gonna do it.
Is there a way to have like on-site, like us go and see this instead of just being bird's eye view?
Many of
And
them
then we make
we
a
did go.
decision?
Previously under this text, yeah.
Because this is gonna be
examples.
ongoing. I mean, the next, you're gonna hear about this more and more. Running Lake, you're gonna have people coming in with a lot of money, they're gonna be tearing houses down, and they wanna build next to the water.
But you
So-
can't rely just on the site inspection, because that's still very, it depends on the opinion of whoever's on the planning commission at the time, you know?
Right, but
You-
that's what I'm getting at, like, if we're going off of these numbers or, you know, some kind of line or whatnot, like, wouldn't it be better to be on site and making the final decision?
That
Is
can always
a
be part of
possibility?
it, yeah.
Because Livingston County, they don't care. You,
No.
you could put any kind of building thing down and they'll look at it, they want engineered footings, boom, yep, you're good to go.
Setback requirements are up to the local municipality, that's why we're
Exactly.
dealing with this.
That's why I was wondering, would it be more beneficial since, I mean, essentially, we are in this area, we know these lakes. Like, if someone wants to build 2 feet off the water and there's a brand new house up the hill, like, we should probably go there and say, you know what, you're not gonna be able to do that, you're gonna have to revise your plans. You can be here, this is where your house can sit.
But
Yeah.
that's subjective.
Yeah, that's the issue.
So what, you're saying that they could take that to court saying, well, we own this property, we should be able to build wherever we want?
Yeah, so for instance, Garrett, what happened in the last year and a half, and I don't know how, all the things, but basically, if you, and maybe Ross has a better summary of it, but the way we arrived at our decision to say, hey, let's build here, not up here,
Mhm.
what we showed it was, but what, it wasn't like a clearly explained process from the beginning for, let's say, any random person that comes and says, like you're saying, hey, I wanna build 10 feet off the water. Obviously, that you can't do. Then how are we gonna arrive at our decision as a planning commission, where it's not just us?
Well, it should be the same as any property. I mean,
Yeah, it should be that, and
54
that,
feet off the road, I couldn't build a 10-foot porch.
but that's what we're discussing is
I
like,
mean, it should, a setback is a setback.
yeah.
But the issue is with lakefront properties, people put a high value on the view,
Absolutely.
which doesn't always, I mean, it translates to
I
other
put a high
properties.
value on my front porch I couldn't build.
I'm
Because
kind of
I'm
with you.
154 feet off the road, too close to the road. I mean, come on.
But I've even seen communities where they say, well, in addition to you can't put fences and other things in the waterfront yard, what did we call them? Spike hedges. So they've said if you plant trees and shrubberies as if a fence, you can't do that there too. Because people would do that. Someone cleverly found, I can't build a fence, I want to block my neighbor's view, I'm going to plant arborvitae every 1.5 feet.
Do we have any access to Fenton Township or City of Fenton, what their requirements are?
We have access to all of them.
So what are what's their,
So, yeah,
theirs is what?
in the last.
Livingston County, specifically Livingston County, not accounting for Fenton, I know that
Right, they're
not
obviously
very
different.
many municipalities regulate sightlines.
Right.
Most of them default to setback requirements,
Correct.
inclusive of some of the communities that have a ton of lakes, like Hamburg. They don't touch, they won't touch sightlines. They have setback requirements, and that's where they're at.
But yeah, and what we found is like what Ross mentioned, where it's very different depending on the community, and maybe all of them have the same amount of lakes, but they all treat it differently. So we have to make sure ours is clear, right, Ross? That's the task at hand.
Make sure it's clear. Right now, we're
If we wanna have
basically,
Yeah, if we want to have it.
we're trying, the goal here is to determine what's best for the community. You know, we have a number of lakes. What's the most fair? You know, do we want to regulate it based on an equation, some calculation of sorts? Do we want to regulate it based on setbacks alone? Do we want to, how do we want to treat it? It's big picture right now at this point in
Yeah.
the discussion.
I think whatever it is, it should be able to be determined, no matter which person is sitting here, and what their feelings
Exactly.
are on that lake. Oh, I
Absolutely.
grew up on this
Yeah,
lake, or
yeah.
I know the neighbor. It should be, you should be able to send that to separate people, and they come up with the same thing.
And that's the
Yeah.
problem in the past, is because view is something that is very difficult to regulate, you know, evenly in all scenarios. Because like Kurt mentioned, there are peninsulas, there's coves, there's elevation changes, and all of that plays into what type of lake view you have.
So, and that, I think that kind of goes back to what Kurt mentioned is, will it stand up in court, right? Because, so if there's 3 people and I'm this neighbor and I don't like you building your house that close, but my rights are my, yeah, that's what kind of where it goes, my rights are my property, right? But obviously there's value in people's desire from the community to say, hey, let's protect our site, but obviously that's what we have to work on, so. But yeah, I don't know, Zach, if you have any experiences with other communities and things that have gone to that point, right?
Yeah, and so the Dexter Township, though they did call it sightlines, that was foremost of their mind, is that how do you look out from your house to see the water? So that's how it was designed. It doesn't, it's not called that, but that's what they were intending to do with it.
Do you know of, I guess this is kind of probably like court cases or anything in other communities that?
None are coming to mind right now.
Well, I think what we'd like to see, or at least I would personally, is take a look at what you've got there, and maybe we can take a look at some scenarios of houses along the lakes and see how that could be administered one way or the other. Because examples are much easier to deal with than trying to give somebody, here's the formula, take it down and figure it out. You got to, the square root of something multiplied by pi and divided by the.
Yeah, that's Webster Township. Don't copy that one. But and one thing that I forgot to mention is the way that this was actually written too is that, remember, the minimum setback and the maximum setback was tailored for different areas around the lakes. So there are some areas where the lots were bigger and they were adjusted to be bigger versus areas where there were little tiny lots, they were smaller and closer to the water. So there's fine tuning that can be done even within the general traverse line, sight line process.
You see, opinions differ on this, all the way from don't touch anything to you can't build next to me because it's going to affect my sight line somewhere. And that's basically where we are at the extremes here.
Mm-hmm.
So do we need something, and if we do, how do we make it work?
I seem to think the only fair way is to set back on the lake. Because really, when you buy a piece of property, your view is straight out is what you own. So, I mean, if you take 3 vacant lots, one guy builds his house close to the lake, one guy builds his back, it all changes that sight line if you line them all up. I mean, there's got to be one common denominator in the whole thing where everybody can say, well, it's this.
Yep, I agree 100%.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I mean, I don't know how you please everybody on the lake.
You're
You
not.
can't.
You're not.
There's no way.
Well, I know when we checked with Heartland about that, which is one of our close municipalities we like to try to compare ourselves to, they have a lot more lakes and they won't touch the sightlines. Not to
Right.
say that's what's right for our community. Obviously, there was some intent at some point to put these regulations in place. But, we're at this point right now trying to determine, do we want to take what we have, keep running with it, do away with them, come up with something completely different? I mean, there's all sorts of options. But
Well, but
that's
here's the
a
thing.
big argument.
Say
that-
there's all of us here for a meeting, and somebody comes in, this is the sight line. Well, now there's 3 or 4 or 5 of us here. Now the guy's got a whole different opinion. I mean, so it changes. So you gotta almost pick something, and it's the same for everybody.
Absolutely.
Is how I feel.
What is it right now, 150 feet?
It's 50 feet.
50 is what the setback is from the high water mark.
And then if you choose to build your house further back, that's your choice.
Exactly.
Don't forget.
And you can always add on, you can tear
What's
it
that?
down.
There's a cost, the closer you get to the lakes, the
Right.
more expensive that.
Yeah, and then.
Right, pylons and everything else.
But,
Pulling
yeah,
excavators out.
Yeah.
and it varies. areas all over our lakes, like if you go, some cases, if you go closer, it's easier to build there.
Oh, a lot of areas around
Then
Runyon
going
Lake with all the
further
natural
away, so
springs, yeah.
That's why
It's tricky.
it makes it hard to try to plan for every
Yeah.
possible scenario.
But is 50 foot the number?
That's
That's-
what
that's-
I-
that's the thing. That's the
I'm-
issue.
I'm with you on that.
You get a weird lot where 50 foot, puts you in a real bad spot.
Now, in those cases, they could potentially request a variance. If it were just setbacks and
Right.
sightlines were not taken into consideration, then they could request a variance depending on, that specific piece of property.
Right. If
Yeah,
we're
and
dealing
we need to
with
go through the
variance-
criteria.
Yeah.
You need to show
They would need to
I
demonstrate.
can't repeat them all, but probable cause or some kind of,
Yeah. Plus,
Extreme
people have
Substantial justice.
septic tanks and wells and are on a lake, okay? And that makes a difference too on where you're gonna be
Yep.
able.
And so that's the thing where if you do decide, just this is the number of feet from the ordinary high water mark, you can size it differently for different lakes.
yeah, based on their zoning.
Yep, or even you could say on Runyon Lake, it's 40 feet, on this lake, it's 30 feet, based on the historical patterns and the size of the lots.
Because some of these lots are 60 feet wide and 1,100 feet long.
What I don't like is say Runyon Lake was cottages back in the day, and someone chose to buy this narrow lot and build their house way up by the road, thinking back in the day, they could see this whole lake. And now that they own that view, how's that any different if I built a house in a subdivision, I had a nice farm view, then they built the rest of the subdivision around me? It's no different, right? If you wanted that whole view, then you should have bought all those lots. And
Because really what it says is first person there gets to decide what the sightlines are.
yeah,
That's one of the biggest arguments against sightline regulations.
Yeah.
and that's if the planning commission
Yeah.
determines it.
And then how do you determine what the new sight line is if you have someone come in and do a tear down, and while they build, they're gonna build in front of their existing house, so then he changes the sight line for the
Mhm.
next
Exactly.
house, which
that's
that
what
next
happens.
house is
That's
also an old cottage, and then the next one, and then all of a sudden we're 10 feet from the water, and now our setback was 40 or 25.
It wouldn't be as much as 10 unless we change the setback requirements, but it could be pushing it closer and closer to 50. Whereas the current development for some areas, like say along Runyon Lake Road just north here,
Yeah.
they're setback up on a hill, far back from the water. As more people build, if we have those regulations, they could tend to, push forward, not beyond 50 feet, but 50 feet is close if you're dealing with a 500, 600 foot lot, right?
Oh, I understand.
Yeah, so I think for us, maybe it would be good in our next meeting to say, hey, well, here's an example of an ordinance that has, hey, here's your setback and that's it. And then maybe look at Dexter and say, that would help us provide direction to you or Ross and Zach to say, hey, here's what our direction is, let's go this route. And
It's a
run it
big,
by the township board.
it's a big picture question, but it really couldn't get a whole lot more complicated than this topic, just because there's so many different varying opinions on how to treat it. And so many different municipalities treat it so different. There's not a standard.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is like us as a planning commission could provide direction that we would rather go the route of let's have a setback.
Yeah, regardless.
And then, or hey, let's try something like the Dexter example. Not necessarily that we have to do it.
Yeah, I mean,
I think
the
that would
planning
help to
commission
get
at
us-
this point would put together the recommendation to the board to
Yeah.
grant final approval or denial.
Yep.
But at this point, it could be, improve on existing, start from scratch, come up with other formulas, or remove altogether. That's where we're at right now, is putting together a recommendation.
Yep.
But every one of these we've done, the neighbors have either complained or the builders complained.
Everybody always complains. Yeah.
It's
water.
nonstop.
Yeah. No matter what, people are gonna
I
complain.
mean, they're mad. One of them's mad, guaranteed.
And if you put it in black and white, you can be 50 feet from the lake, then there's nothing to be mad about. You can be 50 feet from the lake. Or 100
I
feet.
mean, that's one way to do that, that's
I
right.
mean, it's
I
just.
mean, because it's never ending.
No,
No,
I
it's
know.
not.
As long as people are gonna buy cottages and build a Taj Mahal to replace them, that's what you're gonna run into. So we beat that to death, I think.
Definitely something to think about, and, maybe we can touch
Yeah.
on it more at our
Yeah.
meeting on Wednesday.
I think I'm gonna just
I think that's
read
why
Fenn
the other
Townships.
municipalities have done
That's
it.
a start.
Mhm.
They don't have one?
I don't think
Like
so.
Fenton, there's none?
I tried,
It's who's
it's
your-
been a while since I've researched it. I know for certain Heartland does not regulate them. I know Hamburg does not regulate them. I don't believe that Deerfield regulates them. Rose Township, I'm pretty confident they don't. I don't recall offhand, but
What
they don't
about,
even regulate keeping of animals, so.
Who's your architect and-
Yeah, so maybe this is a good topic for the workshop also, do more work on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I- So I guess, we have any more information on that at the time? Obviously, we don't have a lot of thoughts, and we can try to get some direction in the next workshop, what we want as a commission.
So we ultimately are gonna be setting, we could set a new number for certain lakes, is what I'm hearing, right?
Well, that's a potential option,
Right.
right? It is an option. In our ordinance currently, it's
If-
50.
Yeah, if it goes that way, I mean, this would be a zoning amendment or multiple zoning amendments. So if the end result is we need to increase or reduce the setback on waterfront properties, that's something that could be updated. It'd be a separate section of the ordinance, but it would be done at this level, at least the recommendation of the board.
Or it could be the minimum setback, and then the sight line between the two houses adjacent.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be both.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I mean,
But then what's gonna be the final say when it goes, if say someone applies for a variance and it goes to the ZBA?
we send it to the CBA.
Then they're, I see what you're.
No, but really, that's what it is. And
No, it's just,
in a lot of cases, at ZBA, what we've seen is there is some that have been approved, some that haven't, but the one, like the most recent one, person wanted to build closer than 50 feet to the water. And because they didn't put not the recent application, Ross, but in the last year, the one in my mind, but they, based on comments from people in a meeting, they said, well, we're gonna move our home 50 feet off the water to respect other sightlines. But they were with a tight lot, so then they had to get a variance, they had to change what the variance they were asking for was the one from the road, would technically be their backyard in the lake, but
yeah.
they're kind of just some scenarios that have happened, but obviously there's so many different scenarios, it's never ending, we could talk on that. That's
Some of us get it before.
yeah. Any other items on sight lines, guys?
Call to the public, I think.
So we'll go to call to the public.
Let's,
Okay, that sightline thing is good. Bill hit the nail right on the head. You just came up with what I was just thinking about. Our houses on Sullivan Lake are pretty much uniformly around the lake, circle. And there's nobody's they're not jig-jaggy. Okay, so even if you say 50 foot from the lake, this guy tears his house down, he's uniformly with his, he's gonna go 50 feet, he's gonna jump up ahead of everybody. So you're gonna have to kind of make a guideline that says, you said it. You just can't go move your house up there if it was existing here. So if all these houses up here, you've been down to Sullivan Lake, haven't you? They're all along the road, on all sides, and we got a lot of depth to the property in the back. Now, someone was 50 feet off the water, my neighbor decided, house burned down, wanted to go closer to the lake. There's my sight line.
Right, well, every lake would have to have a,
Well, that's what I'm saying, that's what I'm saying, setback's fine to a certain extent. But then again, the houses should try to kind of uniformly stay in line. So try to, realistically, let's not get way out of whack where you are, okay.
no, but I'm saying if you don't set up some kind of
Yeah.
minimum,
Yeah, you're right, I agree. And you said, a minute ago, you just said, what if this guy decides,
Intern.
and the guy builds one up here, and he blocks this, I mean, you kind of have to have some kind of uniformity, as the 50, I like the setback, that's great, but the existing homes have to have a manner too. So you have to have just a little bit of consideration there. Because like I said, a lot of these houses are getting torn down. The house in question on Running Lake was my ex-wife's family. Anderson's my ex-brother-in-law. And I was very familiar with that lot in the driveway going down the lake. So, but I understand a lot of it. Because these cabins are small, and these houses you build now are elaborate. So then, you just go see over the top, so you can't anymore. Okay, anyways, on the survey. You throw a bunch of stuff out there, I'm not gonna pick on you, because you did a lot of things. Who's got the skin in the game? Not the voter, the taxpayer. And I brought this up many, many times. We voted on the fire runs, the fire and police protection, $150. And those people in the manufactured home site got the vote on it. They're not paying $150, they're not paying anywhere close. Hey, yeah, I'm all for it. I ain't gonna pay for it. So guess the people that's gonna pay for the roads to be fixed, the people that are gonna pay to put the parks in, that's the people you wanna talk to. I'm the one paying for it. And like I said, I can't just keep beating that dead horse. There's a lot of money that we lost out of that darn, these manufactured home parks. It's a home that's burning, it's people that are gonna need police protection. They voted for $150 per resident. I don't care if it's in the manufactured or not. But let's get back to this taxpayer. I mean, there's a lot of issues a voter can vote on, but when it comes to spending money in this township, it's the taxpayer. It's me, it's you, not the renter. Yeah, I ain't got no skin in the game. I'm all for it, put it in. That's all I gotta say. Merry Christmas, guys.
Thanks, Scott. Any other public comment? Looking for some hands raised.
I see none.
All right, call again, public comment, anyone?
Nobody.
Alrighty, so, those on public, the next is miscellaneous business would be the workshop meeting, would be next Wednesday at 6.
As far as topics, do we want to focus on master plan and sightlines, or is there anything additional that we should add on there? I mean, that'll probably be a pretty good
I think
discussion
that
for a
took
workshop
up
meeting.
2.5 hours to know.
I would say not expand it, focus more deep.
Perfect.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, we can't summarize this every time. I mean, I know it's been a while since we summarized this list, but we can't just summarize everything every time. We gotta focus on something to get it done.
Yeah.
I agree.
Rich, I'll work with you on finalizing the updated action list. And then we
Yeah.
can over to the board and
Yep. Perfect.
be in good shape.
We need to get the information back to you.
Yep, any input that you have, as much input as possible on the master planning process, the items that were discussed.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, Merry Christmas.
And I move we adjourn.
All right, meeting's adjourned. Thanks.
A little long tonight, but yeah, there was a lot of stuff to cover.
Well, it's the first time in a while we had a meeting besides application, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rich, you thought our meeting was gonna be light?
It was like,
Yeah, don't send that up.
well, there was less tension in the air, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how far the Red Wings are behind.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to watch that.
See you, gentlemen.
Yeah.
See you.
Well, like I said, here's put out the survey. And, like I said, it's like that newsletter went up.
You did a fine job keeping the meeting going.
Can't get too long.
Yeah.
Well, we kinda need to go through that list details, because you guys probably didn't see that, but
Yeah.
after that, you got to let us speak.
Yeah, it's super nice to, since we were all here, yeah, to go through it, it was.
Yeah, the only one we're missing is Steve.